Shalom lekulam. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Bacon Heritage Center. Welcome to the latest in our series of Zoom events. Every Wednesday, we have these events in English for both for Israelis and for viewers, listeners around the world. And we usually get a very international crowd. And I think we have that again from Israel, the United States, the UK, elsewhere in Europe, Australia, South Africa. So welcome wherever you are. And that, of course, is the reason why I don't say good evening, because it is evening for me, but not for many other people watching. But welcome in any event. We over the course of the last year and a half, I've been hosting these events, and we've been speaking to different people in Israeli public life and also elsewhere in the Jewish world about different issues that are relevant to the legacy and the thinking of Menachem Begin around Israeli security, Zionism, of course, Jewish history, anti-Semitism, the wider Middle East, and all manner of other issues related to that. Today's a little bit different because we're actually going to be talking very specifically about Menachem Begin himself, and more specifically about a wonderful new or newish film that has been produced about the life of Menachem Begin. The first, really the first feature-length English language documentary about Menachem Begin, which has already been shown many festivals around the United States, and we will be having its first public screening here in Israel, in Jerusalem, at the Jewish Film Festival on December 1st. And with that in mind, and with December 1st just a couple of weeks away, we wanted to draw attention to that screening, to publicize that screening, and to sort of be a kind of prequel, if you like, to that screening by having a conversation with the director of the documentary, Jonathan Gruber. And we'd also hope to be joined by the executive producer, Rob Schwartz. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us, but we're very fortunate to have with us Rachel Greenberg, who was also involved in the production of the film, and we'll be speaking to Rachel as well. So before I introduce our two speakers, I'm just going to do a screen share, and we're going to watch a short trailer for the film, and then we'll get to a short conversation that I'm going to have with our speakers, with our guests, and then we'll go to questions from you, and you can ask your questions by writing them in the chat facility, the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom. So just bear with me while I do the screen share.
His whole vision for Israel was for Jews to come here, feel like it's a safe haven.
באיזה סגנון אתה מתכוון להיות ראש ממשלה?
סגנון יהודי טוב.
What he want to say is stay straight.
שנסו מותניכם, חיזקו רוחכם.
Very different from my political views, but I think he was one of the greatest leaders that Israel had.
Menachem Begin believed in the need for the Jews to seize their future.
Begin was very much a survivor.
Never again. There won't be another Holocaust in the history of the Jewish people.
He was described as being anti-democratic, but he proved to be the most democratic of all.
He had faith in his convictions and a very clear view of the way that things are supposed to go.
He was a hero for all the Jewish Ethiopian community.
No more war.
He had the credibility to make the first peace with an Arab nation.
He was a man of profound contradictions.
Both sides were engaged in an existential fight.
Israel has nothing to apologize for.
Menachem Begin, with all his faults, belonged to a different class of leader.
You rise, you struggle, and guarantee the prospect of living in peace for your children
and their children.
Okay. Thank you all for staying with us for that. Okay, so as you can, I hope that whetted your appetites for seeing the movie, and we'll post a link to where you can purchase tickets for the movie if you're based in Israel later in the proceedings, and also how to arrange or find a screening wherever you are as well. We can talk to Rachel about that. Okay, Jonathan Gruber, thank you so much for joining me. Jonathan has been directing and writing and producing award-winning documentary films for more than 20 years. His documentaries include Miriam Bierman, Expressing the Chaos, Follow Me, the Yoni Netanyahu story, Life is a Banquet, Jewish Soldiers in Blue and Grey, STU and Polar's March. He was also the co-creator and executive producer of the MSNBC series, The Story of Cool. Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I like the way you say the story of cool. It's very cool.
How else might I have said it?
I don't know. It's just the British accent.
The British accent. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah.
Thank you for having me and Rachel on. We appreciate it. We're excited about the first major public screening of the film in Israel in 2 weeks. I know for Israel that's a lifetime away, but we're happy to talk about it.
Sure. And Rachel Greenberg, you're a producer on the film and an English language researcher with the Hidden Light Institute, which was the organization that put the film together, that produced the film. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Thank you.
I do want to say Rachel is actually, we're actually especially fortunate to have Rachel because she's literally just touched down from at Ben Gurion Airport and made her way to Jerusalem from the States. So we're not sure if the internet connection will hold out throughout, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. But Rachel, can you hear us?
I can. It goes in and out a little bit, so I'll let you know.
We'll be fine. All right, so let me start. Actually, Rachel, maybe I could start with you. As I said, originally we were going to have Rob Schwartz with us, and Rob was really the initiator of this whole project. In his absence, can you just fill us in on the story of how he what planted that seed, that idea in his head? Because I know that it involved a certain book that many people on this call might have read, and also a conversation with his former boss, Senator Joe Lieberman.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. So yes, it was a book he read. It was Yehuda Avner's book, The Prime Minister, which many of you may be familiar with, which really goes through everything that he experienced, as whether it was the communications person or chief of staff or advisor to the prime ministers. And as Rob read it, he was so impressed with Menachem Begin and his values and his principles that he started to Google and see if there was what was available in English. And he did find, he found 10-minute snippets here, articles here, but he really didn't find anything that was a feature-length film. And he actually used to be chief of staff for Senator Lieberman when he was Connecticut state senator, and he was going out to lunch with him very soon after that. And he mentioned to him, have you read any good books lately? And Senator Lieberman said, in fact, I actually just read The Prime Ministers by Yehuda Avner. And he said, who is your favorite prime minister? And lo and behold, it was Menachem Begin. And so they talked a little bit about that. And the next day, Rob emailed the senator and said, I want to come over to your office. I have an idea. And he went over to his office and said, I'm going to make a feature-length documentary of the film. And as you can see, he did it. And one of the things that's actually interesting, I sent him a photo yesterday, is that the first time I actually heard of this project was 5 years ago yesterday. Because if any of you have Google Photos, sometimes on a day a photo was taken, it pops up. And I happened to be, and it was in Israel as well, and he happened to be mentioning to me this story. And so I actually was working in corporate America at the time, and I was doing very enterprise-wide business development, operations, strategy work. And for a couple of years, we stood up the not-for-profit that created the film. And then I moved in when we hired Jonathan Gruber. I moved in, I have a strong background in research, and we'll talk a little bit about more some of the findings that we had, but I moved into kind of a hybrid role on both the production side and the production management side.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that as well. But Jonathan, I want to bring you in and ask you about, excuse me, about your involvement and as director. And obviously, as I mentioned in the introduction, in your introduction, this is not the first film that you've been involved in about a famous Israeli. You wrote and directed Follow Me about Yoni Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. What was it about Begin that appealed to you as someone to make a film about? Because clearly there's lots of things that someone could make a film about Israel, but if you're going to focus on just one person, you couldn't do a whole documentary film that would be gripping and interesting and keep the audience sort of engaged about everyone.
Mm-hmm. So as a junior member of the team, I guess I've only been doing it for close to 3 years, part of the project. It was, and I didn't really know that much about Begin. I was young when the peace accords between Israel and Egypt happened, and I was just struck by how pivotal Menachem Begin was to the state of Israel, the pre-state, and his life going back to his time in Belarus and what is Belarus today, but Poland. And his involvement in Beitar and connection with Zev Jabotinsky and revisionist Zionism, and then coming to Israel and how important he was, his heading up the Irgun, and how that was really pivotal in terms of help forcing, on some level, the British, leaving. And I thought it was fascinating, the rivalry between Ben Gurion and Begin, and everyone knows about Ben Gurion and the first prime minister and what he brought to the state. But Begin to me was this sort of hidden character that people didn't really know much about until he became prime minister. But he was so involved, for decades beforehand, and right. When he was in the opposition.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, speaking, if you like, on behalf of the Begin Center, that. One of the reasons I think we were so excited about this film was that we know very well here how much of a deficit there is in information and knowledge about Menachem Begin outside of Israel in the English-speaking world, certainly compared to, say, Ben Gurion or Yitzhak Rabin or other political figures, mainly because the left side of the map in Israeli politics was dominant for many years, and that was, I think, that was very much the side that wrote the history of the state, the early history of the state, and Begin and his side were kind of written out of history to a large extent, and it was so, and as I said, that this film fills such a hole, it fills such a gap in the resources for English speakers about Menachem Begin. And I think that's why from our perspective it's such an exciting project. If I can go back to you, Rachel, what was can you tell us something about, as I said at the beginning, you're involved with the Hidden Light Institute, which is this institute that Robert Schwartz founded. Can you tell us something about the institute? What are its aims and objectives? How do they tie in with this project?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Hidden Light Institute itself was founded as a vehicle initially to make the film. So, in terms of having donations and having right. IRS acknowledgement of that, it was created. But it's about exploring both profiles of courage in both Israelis and Jewish leaders around the world, and making sure that everything has an educational component that's not only addressed to an adult population, but is addressed to a youth population. So right now our focus has been more on the Menachem Begin Legacy Project. We have several other projects in the flux, but to share a little bit about this Menachem Begin, we have the film, which is really the nucleus of the project. That's everything is an offshoot of the film. We also have different partnerships. So we have different partnerships that are going to roll out later in 2022. So with Open Door Media, they're creating a 30-minute version of the film with a discussion-based curriculum that's going to roll out into high school students and youth groups globally. And we have a partnership with Stand With Us that's going to take the film to 100+ campuses in the UK, Israel, Europe, South America, and the US, as well as many other organizations like Fuente Latina that likes to educate Latin-speaking organizations and some Christian-based organizations as well. But the idea is sharing these principles. So, you know, when you see the film, you're going to see so much, a little bit about what Jonathan touched on, but also Paul, is that what does Israel look like today? So the film isn't just a biography of Menachem Begin, it's really telling the tale of modern day Israel. And if you look at Israel today, it looks a lot more like Menachem Begin than Ben Gurion. You know, it started out as socialist and secular and pioneering, and now it's more traditional, and it has it's much more multicultural. He embraced Jews from all over the world, and he externalized speaking about the Holocaust as part of the society. And really, you mentioned that it used to be Labor and Likud, but actually everybody's claiming Menachem Begin today. So you could be right, left, or center. And the headline in the New York Times during the election said, "Left, right, and center claim voice from the grave, Menachem Begin." So he's really a man of the people here, and his values really resonate with so many people. And we've met so many people, Jonathan, interviewed people on the street. Every type of person really claimed Menachem Begin.
Right.
That's someone they looked up to.
It's a great point. I remember I did a one of these Zoom things. I was giving a sort of post-election, in the last election that we had, a post-election talk, and someone asked me the impossible question: is who Menachem Begin, which party Menachem Begin would have supported or been part of, and obviously I wasn't going to answer that. But I did say that what's interesting is that if you ask the members of those different parties, or even voters of those different parties, many members and voters of different parties would claim that Menachem Begin would be in their party. Jonathan, the film makes really great use of archive footage, but it also has this really stellar cast of talking heads of interviewees. Some are people that knew Begin personally, like former Minister Dan Meridor, or former Attorney General Eliakim Rubinstein, and they're also contemporary writers and public intellectuals that many people on this call will know, like Daniel Gordis and Yossi Klein Halevi. Can you tell us how you went about choosing who to interview, what to interview them about? How do you get that mix of the people that knew him and the people that are now writing about him? And also, of course, as it happens, also some people that are critical of him.
Sure. Well, it was really important to get people from different sides of the political map. We wanted to make a film that was nuanced and represented the complexity of Begin, because as you said, there were things that he did which were controversial. There were tragic mistakes, and we wanted to make sure that was covered. Just to go back in terms of the archival, I mean, we have to start with the Begin Center, which really was a tremendous resource for us that led us down the road to incredible interviews that we were able to really tell Menachem Begin's story in his own words for the most part, and tremendous photographs and archival materials. And then we went to, we had researchers in Israel that helped us with a lot of footage from Channel One and other resources. And then Rachel, who not only was a critical producer on the film, but also went around the US to, whether it was the Ronald Reagan Library in California, to the Carter Center in Atlanta, to in Nashville, to the Vanderbilt TV and Film Archives that has all these news stories that you'll see in English. So without those archival materials, I mean, then it would be really just talking heads. But we tried to mix in people who knew him. And as you said, there's Dan Meridor, there's Aryeh Naor, who was a cabinet secretary. There's Yonah Klimavitsky, who's his personal secretary. And we were, I mean, Israel's a small country. So I also have to give credit to our other producer, Gidon Orman, who we learned a new phrase in Hebrew called kombina, which is, he just figures out how to make it happen. So when I said, sort of at the last minute, we want to get Yossi Klein Halevi, we want to get Michael Oren, how do we reach them? And he would be able to get to them. And then, we said we really do want to have a broad look at his career. We want to talk about the ups and the downs. I mean, it's primarily a positive film, but we don't shy away from certain controversial things. And people just had tremendous recollection of him. I mean, he made such an impact on people, personally. But then, as Rachel said, sort of the impact of Menachem Begin to today's Israel is apparent.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great point you make about the nuance of the film, because I think you come away from the film being very much impressed by his greatness in all different aspects, but also very aware that he was a flawed leader, like all leaders who did make mistakes. And you do hear obviously criticism, and also I think some of the dilemmas that he faced, which he didn't solve, which because he was unable to solve them, and other leaders have been unable to solve them, and we still have them today. And I think that's also important.
And kudos to you, Paul, and the Begin Center for working with us and understanding that it's an important way of telling his story. That if it was just hagiographic and only positive, then it just loses its credibility. What I do wish we were able to have were more Arab voices, and I think it speaks to the situation in the Middle East, unfortunately, and here in the States, that people, unless they saw it as a film that was just going to rip Menachem Begin, they didn't want to be a part of it. We had one Jordanian, Gaith Al-Omari, who's connected to the Washington Institute, who spoke and really added some tremendous insights. We interviewed an Egyptian academic who, after we interviewed him, said, I don't want to be part of the film. There was a Palestinian academic who canceled the day before. So, some of as great as the cast is, that we have in this film from left, right, and center, I wish we could have had even more diverse voices, but it really speaks to the matzav that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I actually didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately, that's the case. And I think it's as you say, any Israel focused film that isn't very explicitly an anti-Israel or a critical of Israel film is not going to appeal to many in the on the Arab side, unfortunately. Rachel, when you first got involved in this project, and I think I know Jonathan said that he didn't know so much about Menachem Begin when he first got involved in it. Is that the case with you as well? Did you learn a lot of new stuff? I mean, how would you sort of describe your own sort of arc of education with this project?
I'd say if you had said Menachem Begin to me before the project, I know about the peace treaty and I know about the bombing of the King David. And those were, for the most part, like two seminal areas that we address. Obviously, we spend a lot of time on those areas in the film. Yeah. But I think what really struck me, and I think what makes him good fodder for a film, is the contradictions, right? So we haven't yet talked about his relationship with his wife, and I know Jonathan loves to talk about that. But when you see the film, we get a lot of response. That he's an orator and warrior, and then he has this like loving relationship with his wife that you don't see politicians acknowledge them before they acknowledge anything else, right? You have someone who compromised for peace, but then you also have built out Judea and Samaria. So there's what I love about the film is that it starts to peel back the layers of the onion. So the idea is that you walk away wanting to engage further on the topics, wanting to learn more. And what Jonathan does so successfully, I think, is that when there's a big topic, he has multiple voices kind of giving their opinion. So it just opens up your thinking into like, oh, you could look at it this way, you could look at it this way, or you could look at it that way. And then it allows you to determine how you want to look at it as the movie progresses, or when you start to think about the film after you've seen it.
I think that's absolutely right. I want to just ask the audience to start writing in your questions, because I'm going to come to you soon. There has already been a very practical question about screenings in different places. I posted the link to buy tickets for the screening here in Jerusalem at the Cinematheque here in Jerusalem on December 1st. Someone has asked if there'll be other opportunities to see the film in Jerusalem. At this point, I don't think we have anything scheduled, but it's something we can, if we see there's a demand, then we can try and make that happen here at the Begin Center. So we'll see what we can do with that. But certainly anyone that wants to see the film that can't in Israel and is based in Israel, that wants to see the film that can't make it December 1st, you can get in touch with me. I'm writing my email address here. Sorry, my capitalization is on.
And at Rachel, some point down the road, Paul, we have a cut down version that we're working on. So this feature length version is about 87 minutes, but we have a 56-minute version that hopefully people will be able to see at the Begin Center at some point down the road, but we don't have any dates yet. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Paul, but that's
no, that's fine. Yeah, I'm aware of that, and we're looking into how we can utilize that, because I think that would be an amazing resource, both in terms of public screenings, but also education as an educational resource is something we definitely want to make use of. Yes, anyone on this call who is involved in any way in Israel education, and that's something to think about as well. The shorter version, the 58-minute version that Jonathan just mentioned. Rachel, people that are based outside of Israel, what's the best way for them to try and find a screening or arrange a screening?
Yeah, so let me talk just a little bit about how the rollout's going right now, because that will help people kind of understand. So because of like the paradigm with COVID, you had to change your plans, right? So we didn't do what you call a theatrical release, which would have been in person in movie theaters, because the movie theaters weren't open. So what we did was something very special and unique on June 7th. On June 7th is the significance that it was the 40th anniversary of Osirak, but we did a one-time only Facebook premiere, so people could have seen it at a specific time. And we had a private screening at the Begin Center that night for the Begin family, those featured in the film, and a couple dozen ambassadors and special guests and friends. And now what's going on from now until the end of the summer, we're doing what we call private affiliate screenings and film festivals. So that means that we've already hosted probably, I'd say 45 plus all over the US. I actually came back from London 2 weeks ago. We were there for a week. We're in the Jerusalem Film Festival. We're in the Australian Jewish Film Festival, both Melbourne and Sydney in March. We're in South Africa later in the year. We have about 30 states already represented. And basically, I'll put my email address in the chat as well. If people know of organizations, we're doing a lot. We're starting to do like Middle East and international relations societies. We've done churches and schools. We're doing, even tonight, we're doing University of Pennsylvania Law School. And Thursday night, we're doing a synagogue in Baltimore. So every week we've been having 4, 5, 6 of these. So I will put my email in. Anyone could reach out if they, and we're going to start posting as well where the different locations are. I'll let Jonathan also talk about, we're going to do a public television run of the 60-minute as well, and he could explain that. And then next September, it's going to also be more widely distributed.
Fantastic. Just before we go to Jonathan, was it also screened, or is going to be screened in London?
Yeah, so it was screened 2 weeks ago in London. We did several screenings, very interesting. We did one for the Parliament, House of Lords, and the Parliament. We did one for University College London International Relations Society, which was actually 60% non-Jews there. it was absolutely fascinating. The questions the young people asked. We had someone from Germany saying, Jews are too quiet in Germany. They should model themselves after Begin. We had tough questions too. I mean, you're going into the United Kingdom with the British, and someone said, does all of his efforts with peace cancel out the terrorist activity and the killing of British? So there were a lot of questions. It was very different. Had an interesting relationship. That's a whole story in and of itself.
Rachel, you just cut out that second.
One of the things I came across in the
you just cut out a second. You just cut out that second. Who had an interesting relationship?
Margaret Thatcher.
Oh yes, and Begin indeed. Right.
But there was one letter I came across in the research which I loved, was that, for those of you who don't know, one of Begin's first activities during when he was prime minister was he brought 66 Vietnamese refugees into Israel. And they were found, they were fleeing the communist regime, and they were found floating in the waters, and several countries wouldn't take them in. And Begin said, we have to take them in. Like the St. Louis was returned, we need to follow this example. And there were a lot more that needed refuge. And he wrote to Margaret Thatcher, who was working with the UN on a conference to decide what to do about the refugees, saying, Prime Minister Thatcher, you know what happened at Evian, and for those of you, the Evian conference was when they were trying to see who would open up their immigration quotas to let the Jews in, and the only country there was the Dominican Republic. Both the British weren't going to let them in Palestine, and the US hadn't actually met their quota limits, and they also were quiet there. And he said, it's our obligation for every country to take a proportional number of people, get rid of these conferences. They didn't save one Jewish child. So not only did he conjure up the Holocaust, which he continues to do throughout his career, which is also a theme in the film, but he's coming up with a real practical solution to help to solve the problem. And we had one student who was actually from Philadelphia at the student screening in London, and said, it's interesting, with all of the immigration, the world can learn from him. And it's a really powerful story that should be shared. So there's something for everyone in this film, and really real credit to Jonathan, because you could engage in any panel discussion after this. And that's what I'm finding, because I'm arranging the affiliate screenings, and people are just choosing anti-Semitism, they're choosing Jewish unity, they're choosing conflict resolution, they're choosing, Abrahamic Accords, whatever it is. There's something really enough information there to challenge you and your thinking and open up your mind.
Fantastic. Jonathan.
No, I was just going to say, the hope is that people don't just watch it once and they're done with it. It's a layered film. There's a lot in there in almost 90 minutes. And Menachem Bacon was, in the public eye for 50 years, or more, in various contexts. And there are things that, for instance, he spent time in the Gulag, and that was his connection to, when Soviet Jews were struggling to emigrate, he had this personal connection, to that story when Ethiopians were trying to get out of Ethiopia. He was the one who started these secret program to evacuate them from the Red Sea. There's a famous story. It's come out now, this thing called the Red Sea Resort. And we interviewed the head of the operation, who was a member of the Mossad. So there's so many different things in this film that covers his life, but also the history of Israel and how integral he was to these stories. And as Rachel was saying, how those sort of multiculturalism, his bringing in Sephardim, who were really discriminated against, for many years. He brought in the first Sephardi cabinet minister, David Levy. But there's so many things that I learned, and the thing that I'm so grateful about is that I get to understand the nuances of Israeli society, and Israeli history. And even though much of my family lives in Israel, I don't have, my fingers aren't on the pulse of the country. So whether it's this or whether it was the previous film I made about Yoni Netanyahu and the raid on Entebbe, understanding sort of the tensions between sort of the kibbutzniks, which were the members of the Sayeret Matkal, and Yoni Netanyahu, who was a Yerushalmi. These are all maybe a little inside baseball, but it really lends to the storytelling. And I think that in the Begin story, there's so much there, and hearing from people today and how they care so much about Begin and the values that he represents, and sort of the leadership values and the sort of dearth of leadership that we have, and a person who's willing to take responsibility for his actions, whether for good or for bad. The leaders today are often willing to take credit, but not taking blame. And the fact that he resigned, who does that these days, is remarkable.
Indeed. Yeah, I think there's often a kind of lazy tendency, which probably all of us have to some extent, when we're looking at the politics of a country that we don't know quite as much about as our own country, where we just do a sort of copy and paste from our country into that country. Say, okay, these guys are the Republicans and these guys are the Democrats, or these guys are the conservatives and the liberals, whatever. And it just doesn't work that way, because the politics are so different and the situation is so different. And Begin's so fascinating because he's this traditional Jewish Israeli with such a feel for the idea of Jewish tradition and Jewish national identity, and he's also a liberal in a very fundamental way. It's a really fascinating aspect which comes across very well in the film.
And as a lawyer, this isn't in the film specifically, but he believed in the rule of law. So when he was expanding settlements in Judea and Samaria, if the judges ruled, for instance, that one was legal, they would let it stay. But if it was illegal, he didn't try to go around the judges. He said there are judges in Jerusalem. Right. And so that's just one example of his respect for the rule of law. That he had an ideology, certainly, but if it went against the rule of law, then he would have to, figure something else out. Yeah, absolutely. Can you say something, Jonathan, about what Rachel referred to, the rollout on the television screenings of the? Sure. So between now and spring, late winter, early spring, Rachel, as she said, she's doing an amazing job organizing these screenings around the U.S. and around the world. Certainly in Israel, if people are interested, we'd love to share it. And there's many ways of doing it, whether it's virtually or in person. In March, the film will be distributed to public televisions in the U.S. And we don't have a schedule yet, but once we figure that out, and once it's released, then it's going to be, basically it'll be on for the next 3 years. So public television stations have the license to run it as many times as they want. I see someone was asking about the DVD. We're also going to be waiting, though, for the DVD until September, when it'll be available on iTunes and Amazon and all of those rollouts. So hang tight, for those sorts of things, because we really want to make sure that we get it out in these more high-profile ways before people can just watch it on their computer at their leisure. We really want to give it the proper rollout that it deserves.
Right, absolutely. Anne Swirsky is asking whether Netflix might end up on Netflix.
It will not be on Netflix, but there are other venues and ways of seeing it for sure. And if you go to upheavalfilm.com, that's the film website, you can get on our mailing list, and we can keep you posted and up to date on things.
Okay, so we can can you write that in the chat, Jonathan, for us?
Yeah, I will do that right now.
There was a question which I can put to both of you from I think from Ilana, who asks, what were you most surprised by in the making of the film? Maybe Rachel can answer that first.
I would say a sense of humor. And I think that would shock a lot of you, because you see him as that fiery orator, and he's serious. And not only he had a witty, sarcastic side that was really wry, very quick wit, but he also had a softer, just a bellowing laugh. You don't see some of that in the film. You do see some of his quickness or his charm, where he talks about, there's a scene where he's dancing with, there's some Sephardic, he's at a table and there's a party and they're dancing, and he makes a comment about, oh, focus on the beautiful women, or Jimmy Carter, when he's talking about the land in Judea and Samaria, he makes a comment and Jonathan may know it verbatim, but something like, someone who knows the Bible as well as Jimmy Carter should know, knows to whom the land belongs. but he always had jokes when you meet. I love meeting people who actually knew him, and we've been blessed that we have Hart Haston, who was in the film, and he was a good friend. You had like Yossi Nachmias. You had this woman Bruria, who was introduced to him as Uncle Yisrael, meaning when he was fighting, when he was in the underground and he was under disguise, her father was the treasurer of the Irgun, and she didn't know it was Menachem Begin. She said, "Oh, it was a friendly guy who played chess with me in the house." So to get the stories from them and hear how warm he was, and really loved the family and put the family, above everything else in human relations. And the one other thing, I want to mention aside from the humor is his personal interactions. He remembered everyone. There's a story, Yona Klimavitsky, who was his personal secretary, said when she changed the color of his hair, he noticed. Aryeh Naor, who was a cabinet minister who's in the film, said he actually met him when he was 8 years old because his uncle was David Raziel, who was the former head of the Irgun, who was killed. And when Begin took over the Irgun, he came to pay the respects to this man, Aryeh Naor's grandparents. And Aryeh came running into the house to meet Menachem Begin, and he was carrying a turtle. And I still am not sure where the turtle came from, but he said years later when he went to report to Begin when he was going to work for him, he said, "Oh, the turtle story." So he remembered things about people, meaning that he paid attention, that he listened, that every person was an individual and it wasn't just a political game for him.
Jonathan, what about you? And what were you most surprised by?
I mean, there were so many things that were surprising, but just to, one thing. Well, first off, it's great to hear from Ilana. Thank you. She and her husband, you're dear friends. They live in Zichron Yaakov. So thanks for the question. It was his ability to stay as the leader of a group in the opposition for nearly 30 years. I mean, and that he stayed the leader, meaning that the people under him said, "No, you're still our leader." Like that ability to lead when he kept losing election after election after election. I could go on 8 more times because that's how many times he lost the election to be prime minister. Today, I mean, someone loses an election, they're out. Right. That's just it. And so, number one, they recognized how he was. He wasn't just doing this, for political expediency. He, as Dan Meridor says in the film, he stayed true to his ideological self, and if it meant that he wasn't going to lose the election, he would stay in the opposition. He wasn't going to change his position. So that to me is remarkable, and that after 30 years, as Begin, modestly says, we had patience and we stayed together, and eventually the people, gave us a chance.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes across for me is I mean, just knowing about him, but just also it comes across in the film is his extraordinary humility. Like his modesty is just really something to behold, right? The way he's so I mean, there's no other word for it. He just has this modesty. I mean, I think even when he becomes prime minister, you saw it in the clip there in the trailer. How are you gonna, in what style are you gonna be prime minister? Just as a simple Jewish style. That's his way. And I think in this speech he gives after he becomes prime minister, and he says that I think he even refers to the students of Ben Gurion as the people they're going to work with. There's just this willingness to always to never raise himself above other people, even when he has become essentially the foremost person in the country after winning the election.
The other thing that's so important to talk about in terms of his humility is he never enriched himself through his position. He didn't set himself up at the end. He didn't have a book deal. He didn't have high-priced consulting gigs. When he was done, the people around him had to put together sort of a kitty to get himself an apartment in Jerusalem. It was a modest place where he lived in isolation. He didn't, people may or may not know, but after he resigned after the tragedy of the Lebanon War and Sabra and Shatila, he went into isolation. No one saw him for 8 years. And there's this remarkable footage that our Israeli researchers were able to get of him coming out after 8 years in the press, asking him, "Where have you been?
Right.
Why did it take you so long?" But he just didn't take advantage of his position like so many leaders do today, and it speaks to his remarkable sense. It's not just him, I should say. Other Israeli leaders, Ben Gurion, Golda Meir, they also, did not make a pretty penny off of their position. So I think it's a different generation of leadership.
That's true. That's true. But he also got a tidy sum for winning the Nobel Peace Prize, which he donated to charity.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And another anecdote, which I think Jonathan tells quite often, which I love, is Avital Sharansky, when she was trying to get Anatoly Sharansky out of the Soviet Union, had a huge phone bill because she was talking to world leaders and different rally groups all over the country. And Menachem Begin actually paid her phone bill out of his own pocket.
And yeah, he wasn't telling people about that. He would check in with her and make sure she was okay and pay it out of his own pocket.
Yeah, that's again. In all kinds of respects, he was an extraordinary man. Shmuel asks what the influence of this film could be on the young generation in Israel in 2021.
Well, I think the film itself sort of evolved, and it was originally going to be more of a traditional biography, but December of 2019, there were all these attacks in the New York area over Hanukkah, these anti-Semitic attacks, and it really led me to put front and center the connection between anti-Semitism, unfortunately past, present, and future, and Menachem Begin's belief that this is not something that is just going to go away, and that you have to stand up and you have to fight against anti-Semitism, and that in many circles where people are against, there's racial justice or Islamophobia, and people say this is terrible, that there's you hardly hear a squeak about anti-Semitism, and it's very, very frustrating. And I think that that's something for 2021, for all ages, not just young people, to stand up against anti-Semitism and say has never been acceptable. It is not acceptable now. It won't be in the future, and that hopefully people can feel that Menachem Begin's uncompromising, whether it was the Begin doctrine that said that if a country says that it wants to destroy you, believe them. So believe people who say these sorts of things. Don't sort of poo-poo it or put it under the rug. And saying this is not like a Chicken Little kind of thing. This is a historical thing where Jews and anti-Semitism has been around, and unfortunately you have to constantly be vigilant about it, and that's, I think, a message for young people today.
Great. There was another question I wanted to put to you. I know I've asked that one.
Someone asked if we regret never meeting Menachem Begin.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it would be fantastic. I've been fortunate to meet 3 Israeli prime ministers. A fourth would have been fantastic.
Arlene asks if any of his children are in the film.
That's a great question. We reached out to his 3 children, and much like Menachem Begin and his wife, Aliza, they were very private individuals, and they did not want to take part in the film. They were happy to look at it. And in fact, when they saw the film in June at the Begin Center, they felt that it was an accurate representation of their father. But that they would have been nice to have them, but we understand that they wanted to stay private.
Yeah, that's very much their. Yeah, I mean, I can also just say that they also make a point of not being involved in any way in the running of the Begin Center. They have no formal connection with the Begin Center. That they come to our events because we invite them, obviously, as family members.
End of the screening, he said.
Yeah, Rachel, what were you going to say?
He did say at the end of the screening a line I've never really heard, but it was interesting. He said, "The movie does what a movie should do. It was moving." And then
this is Benny Begin. This is Benny Begin
said that. He said that, and he said, well, he said, and the hero gave you a lot of good material to work with.
Right.
And the daughters, they were really moved. I think also the section with Eliza, it's really poignant, the relationship between them, how Jonathan conveyed it on screen, and there were family pictures in there. So think about if you were watching a film with like your brothers and sisters when they were young and you haven't looked at them in years, and it was, I think part of it was really nice for them to kind of see, but they thought it was a really excellent representation of his life, and my take, they enjoyed the experience. So
yeah,
and even with some of the negatives, I mean, we didn't shy away from it. So that, you know, that means a lot that the family was supportive of what they ultimately saw.
Right, and I think that his children are very engaged, worldly people that travel around. Benny Bacon studied in the United States. I imagine, and I haven't spoken to any of them about this, I'm speculating, but I imagine that it must be in a way frustrating for them that they know that their father was this extraordinary man, and he hadn't been recognized really outside of Israel. And now this thanks to this film, thanks to your work, Jonathan, and your work, Rachel, and others, this is now here for the world to see, for non-Hebrew speakers to appreciate, and it's a real mitzvah. I think it's a real achievement.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions from our audience? Okay, so let's just close by just some final sort of again some practical points, because we want people to see the film. That, as I said, it's going to be screened here in Jerusalem at the Cinematheque on December 1st. If you scroll up the chat,
it's at 5 p.m.
At 5 p.m. indeed, and you can find it online. Let me just find the link again, and I will put that in again so that it's easy to find. As I said, we are going to try and arrange some other screenings. Someone asked me about a screening in Tel Aviv. That's definitely something we would like to do. Obviously, we know that most Israelis actually do live closer to Tel Aviv than to Jerusalem, and we'll try and arrange that as well. And you can be in touch with me and also in touch with Rachel, especially if you're outside Israel. Be in touch with Rachel about screenings outside Israel, and as Jonathan said, it's going to be finding its way to other media, other venues, online venues, and TV where you can see it as well.
And it is right now, Rachel, I was just going to say that right now, if you're outside of Israel, if you're in the US, you can watch it at video on demand at the upheavalfilm.com website for a little while longer. Not much more time. We're gonna take that down.
Okay.
So another thing that we're doing, which I think people will find interesting, is it's not just a movie for Jewish people, right? We want to get out to as broad a number of people. We also want to get out to people who are dealing with issues around Israel. So we're doing some screenings with UN ambassadors. The Israeli ambassador to the UK was at the event in London a couple of weeks ago. She wants to do another screening at our home and invite other ambassadors there, different legislative groups as well. So it's really about like bubbling up, not letting people rely on headlines to understand Israel and to make decisions and opinions on Israel just on that.
And what's interesting, another group that I had no idea, but Menachem Begin had a strong connection to the U.S. evangelical community, and that we've had screenings in the U.S. Among Christians, who also have a very strong feeling towards Menachem Begin and what he did for that relationship.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Another example of where Begin sort of set the stage for a sort of today's Israel in many ways. Ann Swersky says screen it at the Carter Library. That I'm not sure.
Well,
I'm not sure how that would go down.
It would be great.
So we're just so you know, we're in touch with there was a new CEO of the Carter Library that we're in touch with, as well as The chief of staff to Carter at the time saw the film, and NPR in Atlanta is interested. So we're trying to figure out how to put an event together either there or in Atlanta with some of that representation. So we'll keep you posted, Anne.
Excellent.
All these things happening behind the scenes that I don't know about. Cool, Rachel.
Okay, so I hope everyone that's on this call has heard enough to understand how special this film is, and what a really wonderful achievement it is by its director Jonathan Gruber and its producers Rachel Greenberg and Rob Schwartz and others who really made it happen. And certainly, as I said before, we at the Begin Center were delighted that such a film was made, and we're really grateful that there is now this resource in English about Menachem Begin. If you want to, if this conversation is interesting, someone actually messaged me privately and asked to forward this Zoom event to someone. It's being recorded on YouTube, so you can email me if you want to get the recording of this conversation. You can email me paulg@begincenter.org.il, and I will send that to you probably tomorrow. Okay, Jonathan and Rachel, thank you ever so much for joining us. Jonathan from the US, Rachel newly arrived in Israel, I hope to see you both soon. And to everyone who joined us, thank you very much. I hope it was interesting and as I said, enticed you to want to watch the film.
Thanks everybody. Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Rachel. Have a good time.